Ringo really despised him more than anyone. Ringo was born Richard Starkey on July 7 of July 1940 in the working-class Dingle part of Liverpool. Emerged from a childhood full of sickness, trouble, after extended spells in the hospital to become one of the most important drummers in popular the history of music. His first few years were very not easy. Raised by a mother alone, young Richard spent a lot of time in his youth in hospital wards, getting better after having peritonitis and tuberculosis, sicknesses that prohibited him from being around other kids, but also taught him very basic percussion instruments that are used for recovery. These early encounters, despised, set the stage for rhythmic instincts that would later changing the way music is made today. When Ricard finally went back to school, he was much behind his classmates and schoolwork no longer meant anything to him. Instead, he moved toward music, establishing a curiosity with the skiffle mania sweeping Britain in the mid-1950s. He took on the name as he became older, Ringo Starr, partially because of the ringshot donned and partly to give his drum a western sound to solos. He joined Rory Storm with the Hurricanes, one of Liverpool's most well-known bands, rapidly became the most talked-about drummer in the city's busy club scene. His steady tempo, easy swing, and drumming with the left hand on a right-handed kit made his stylistically recognized, while the Hurricane was in Ringo met up with Hamburg, Germany with a young band called the Beatles, making a professional friend that would change his life for good. When the Beatles made the decision in 1962 to get a new drummer, Pete, to take over for their old one they called Ringo Best, his joining marked a change in the group sound and chemistry. With his rock-solid keeping track of time, coming up with new fills, on Ringo, "You Are Always Professional," accomplished the final piece of the Beatles puzzle. He became not just the drummer for the band, but also its heart, the drummer and the heart of the band. A grounding presence who kept Thane's different personalities in Paul McCartney and George Harrison. His drumming on hits like A Day in the Life, Rain, and Ticket to Ride come together showed a subtle brilliance that made the Beatles great music that goes beyond the limits of pop and rock music from the past. Although not as good at writing songs as his Ringo was a great lead singer for his comrades, singing on oldies like Yellow Submarine, with a little help from Me Friends and Octopuses, Gardener to songs that showed his sense of humor, humanity, and skill to reach people of all ages. Ringo went on to have a successful solo career. When the Beatles broke up in 1970, began a successful solo career that critics were astonished by and fans were happy with fans. His first few albums made a lot of it Don't Come and other hits around the world. Yassi, Picture, and You're 16. Music that showed how good he was at melodies that come from the heart and his long-lasting charm. Over the years, he worked with an amazing number of members of the band to Elton John, Harry Nilsson, Mark Elton John, Harry Nilsson, Mark, and the band Bolan, and sometimes his old Beatles bandmates. In 1989, he assembled the first group of musicians in the All-Star Band, a rotating group of talented superstars musicians who travel the world and not only Ringo's music, but also include the classics that each member hostage. People enjoyed these tours, meetings of musical ecstasy that made Ringo a reputation for being one of the best forces in the entertainment industry. Ringo is more than just a great musician. Starr is known for being a message of peace, togetherness, and kindness. His famous saying is "Peace and love" has become a personal saying and a global inspiration. Every year on his people all across the world get together on his birthday to recite love and peace at noon, a custom he started to support being together in a world that is split. His steadfast hope, kind humor, and thankful for the life he's lived made him one of the most admirable who came out of the 1960s saw change in culture. Ringo Starr's people have been interested in his personal life for a long time. For Beatles lovers, and two ladies in particular had a big impact on part in shaping his journey after stardom and music. He was married for the first time to Maureen Cox is a friendly, down-to-earth, and loyal woman who came into his life a long time ago. Being a global star changed him from Ricardo Starkey into the global famous Ringo Starr. The two married in 1965 at height of Beatlemania, a time when musicians could hardly leave the house without being overcome with loving lots of people. But even with all the chaos, their wedding stayed the same. Even through a personal reminder of Ringo's roots, a link to his childhood in Liverpool, Moran had been a loyal admirer of Theb before she joined the Beatles. She was a fan of close friends, and their early relationship had the intensity, secrecy, the joy that came with being engaged with a Beatle during the group's cultural eruption. During Moran and his wife were married for 10 years, turned out to be a regular presence in Ringo's life. People said she was guarding her family fiercely, even physically facing off against angry fans and Yoni went too near to the couple or their kids. Ringo talked about Moran a lot, with love, stressing her faithfulness during a time when the stress of renowned continual travel, and the stress there may have been trouble inside the Beatles, could have easily ended any relationship. Even Thoth's style of the time, both Ringo and Moran dealt with the personal problems that comes with celebrity, extended absences, and how busy the band is and the temptations that came with being global fame. In 1975, after 10 years of love problems and big changes in the way people live, the pair split up. The split was managed with mutual regard for each other, and they stayed in touch through their kids, keeping a sense of kinship long after their passionate relationship ended. Several years later, after navigating how complicated life was after the Beatles while reevaluating his own priorities, Ringo Starr fell in love with someone fresh, and it lasted, with Barbara Bach, an actress from the United States and a former Bond girl who he married in 1981. They met on the set of movie Caveman is a strange ancient movie comedy that suddenly became Thezite, where a lifelong partnership began. Barbara's grace, smarts, and steady emotional presence rang true to play with Ringo, who was at the time looking for a life that is more grounded and spiritually aligned. Life that is in line with their wedding took place in London became a symbol of new beginnings for Ringo, starting a new chapter that was considerably more steady, harmonized, and emotionally satisfying than a lot of expected. After the rough times of the 1970s, Barbara Bach would not go on to become not just Ringo's wife, but also his best friend and partner in personal growth. They worked together to get through sobriety, personal growth, and a calm, intimately linked kind of friendship that was really different amid the crazy years of Ringo's fame before. Their marriage changed over time, became one of the longest and most respected the relationships between the extended Beatles family. A love story that lasts based on mutual support, shared rehabilitation, and the comfort of a long-lasting partnership for more than 40 years, even though Ringo kept touring and recording. To honor his musical legacy, Barbara stayed with him, giving equilibrium, support, and a feeling of that he frequently called home important for his health. Ringo Starr, the famous drummer of the people, often remember Beatles for his happy attitude and funny one-liners, and his skill in keeping the peace between Fab Four, who are known for being quite unstable. But behind there was something about him that made him seem friendly, a complicated and often tense relationship with Paul McCartney, a partnership that at some times could be called quite hostile. Ringo didn't hold back when he said when it came to how he felt about McCartney time, and even after the band broke up. Over the course of decades of interviews, Starr has admitted that there were occasions when he sincerely harbored a strong hate for McCartney, a sentiment that shocked a lot of followers who had always thought the Beatles' offstage camaraderie was just as strong as it seemed like it was on stage. Ringo's honesty is striking, how he talks about his feelings, and it gives a rare look into the tensions that were always there on the surface of one of the most famous bands in the history of music. Ringo once said, in his own words, "I didn't like him at times. Paul pushed me harder than anyone else." Boundaries. This statement was really strong, is important since it comes from a man taught to be the most even-tempered and the most laid-back member of the Beatles. People thought Ringo was neutral a lot of the time, hid the very serious problems he had felt when working with Paul, not like John Lennon, whose sharp wit and were easier to guess because of their rebellious nature, Paul's need for perfection, and some Virgin way of writing songs. Ringo often felt left out of band decisions, put on the back burner, and not given enough credit. Paul's actions made these feelings worse. Insistence on precise preparation and power over the arrangements of music, which sometimes contrasted with Ringo's more instinctive and laid-back way of laying the drums. In a lot of respects, the stress showed a bigger trend in the band. A crash between Paul Ringo's and tireless ambition, a predilection for peace and simplicity. The fight between Starr and McCartney get really bad in the late 1960s. A time when things started to go apart the Beatles' once strong friendship while they were making the White Album. Ringo is well known for leaving sessions early for a few days, feeling too much for thespial fights and passive-aggressive behavior actions that were common at the studio, while John and George were busy with their own arguments. Paul's constant drive to make the music exactly how he wanted it. Ringo often felt like he didn't meet criteria not seen, as if his work didn't matter where not as important. He has talked about it openly this time as tiring and lonely, stressing that he didn't like Paul at all, not out of personal reasons, but not just hatred, but a deep sense of getting angry because they feel unappreciated. He just never let anyone do their thing, Ringo confessed in later interviews. Paul always got his way or the highway, and I got sick of it. He more than anyone else got under my skin, but Ringo had feelings for Paul that were not just bad. They were complex, and based on years of camaraderie, competition, and a common past. Starr had thought about the fact that a lot of his anger was situational, linked to the pressures of celebrity, the stress of recording, and the personal insecurities of a young drummer jetting around the insurmountable norms of Beatles mania. Ringo has come clean about time, point of view, and growth ultimately lessened these feelings. He used to loathe Paul more than later realized that there was a bigger tale behind the fights, one of creative tension and mutual influence, and the occasional fight off strong people. In an honest interview years after these said, I may have after the breakup, I despised him at times, but that was also the energy that made some of the best music we ever made. It's interesting because people's view of Ringo's anger toward Paul often made things too simple. The truth. Stories in the media often made it seem like the Beatles were a band that was split up entirely based on personality, with Ringo as the passive observer trapped in center. But Ringo himself has always stressed how he felt never stayed the same. They went up and down, flowing, shaped by personality pressures of the situation, music industry, and the emotional. A band that had grown up and had a lot of baggage united from teenagers into global superstars. His honest admission of times when he despised Paul more than anyone who points this up shows not just his honesty but also the complicated nature of people behind the Beatles' legendary story. It's a reminder that even famous people may deep feelings that can be hard to deal with, and that the links of friendship and working together is not common easy. In the end, Ringo Starr's convoluted with Paul McCartney helps us a very interesting way to see how the Beatles worked. Starr's willingness to talk honestly about his times of real hate for McCartney, softened by years of thinking and comprehending, shows a man who felt deeply and was really loyal to who he is, and ultimately put honesty over pretending. His words were both sharp and thoughtful, are still an important component of Beatles' legacy, a sign of the human problems that were at the heart of one of the most famous musical partnerships in history. As Ringo said, I loved them all, but I couldn't tolerate Paul at times more than anyone else. In 2015, a very important milestone was reached, Ringo Starr's lasting legacy in the world of music. 27 years after he had initially into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame as one of Rock and Roll Hall of Fame as one of Thester achieved a legendary but Lisa unique honor. He was the last one to become Beatle to get credit for his accomplishments as a solo performer. While George, John Lennon, and Paul McCartney Harrison had been inducted into the Hall beneath the famous performance, Thester's induction stood out in its category, putting him in the exclusive musical best category. A good fight acknowledgement of his special not only as a drummer, but also as a creative force whose music had an effect went on for a long time after the Beatles. This award didn't honor Starr just as a member of one of the most important bands in history, yet as an artist whose solo work had made a name for its own spot in the pantheon of rock and mainstream music. Ringo Starr's tumultuous life came to an end. Friendship with Paul McCartney helps us a very interesting way to see how the Beatles worked. Starr's willingness to talk honestly about his times of real hate for McCartney, softened by years of thoughtfulness and comprehension, uncovers a man who felt a lot and who was really loyal to who he is, and ultimately put honesty over pretending. His words were both sharp and thoughtful, are still an important component of Beatles' legacy, a sign of the human problems that were at the heart of one of the most famous musical partnerships in history. As Ringo said, "I loved them all, but there were times when I couldn't stand Paul more than anyone else." In 2015, Ringo Starr's life was marked with a spectacular milestone, lasting impact on the music industry. 27 years after he first came top it into the Rock and Roll Hall of fame as one of the iconic Beatles, Starr got a unique honor. He became the latest Beatle to be acknowledged for what he has done as a solo artist. John Lennon, Paul McCartney, and George Harrison had been admitted into the hall under the well-known Starr's induction into the performers category stood out, putting him in the only category for musical brilliance. A fitting acknowledgement of his uniqueness not only as a drummer, but also as a creative force whose music had an effect went on for a long time after the Beatles. This award didn't honor Starr just as a member of one of the most important bands in history, yet as an artist whose solo work had made a name for its own spot in the pantheon of rock and music that is popular.